Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Warmest welcome on the behalf of the Aga Khan Council for Canada and the Future Ready Initiative. I am so stoked to see you here today, all of you. My name is Aleem Punja, and I'm the National Operations Officer for the Aga Khan Council for Canada and the lead for the Future Ready Initiative. And I do want to introduce Moise Rajwani, that's here, who's the Executive Officer for the Aga Khan Council for Canada. Before we commence this evening, it's important for us to reflect on the lands that we're on today, where we live, where we work, where we play, where we laugh together. And so I want us to take a moment to certainly reflect on that. And so we are on the lands and now the traditional territory of many nations, of the Mississaugas, of the Credit, of the Anishinaabe, of the Chippewa, of the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. And we want to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by the Dish with One Spoon territory, Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I also think it's incredibly important to personalize land acknowledgements, and what I want to say is, as a settler and as a first-generation Canadian, I want to give thanks to the sacred land and reaffirm my stewardship and deep care for this land that I stand on today. I remain deeply indebted to those who were here before we all came and made it possible for my family and I, who's sitting here on the third row, to prosper and contribute in this beautiful city. I offer these acknowledgements on behalf of all of our speakers today. I'm particularly pleased to really honor and acknowledge special guests from two levels of government. I do want to acknowledge our MPP Adil Shamji from Don Valley East. Adil, if you can stand up and do a bit of a wave. I want to acknowledge Mary Margaret McMahon from Beaches, East York. Also want to acknowledge Councillors Jamal Myers, if you could stand up and, you don't have to dance, from Scarborough North, and Josh Matlow from St. Paul's. That's wonderful, and I'm hoping we haven't missed anyone. We are kind of hoping that you guys registered, and if there are, please do make yourself known to those around you. I do want to take a moment to thank the Canna Rector Foundation for making this important series on housing possible. We couldn't have done it without the foundation. And on behalf of the partnering organizations, Future Ready Initiative, Habitat for Humanity GTA, and Generation Squeeze, thank you for your leadership, thank you for your sponsorship, and thank you for your generosity in making this series a reality. I have goosebumps. I can't believe we're here today, Ian and Paul. Before I move about talking about the evening, I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the place that we're in today, the Ismaili Centre. It's incredibly important to really honor this place because it is a place where people come to pray, people come to laugh, people come to have a good time. And so this site houses the Ismaili Centre Toronto. It is centered by the Aga Khan Park and the Aga Khan Museum, which was conceived really as a beacon of light, one that brings people together and that doesn't divide. And so these initiatives that are housed here were really designed to bring friendship, to foster friendship and understanding, to enhance relationships among faith communities, government, and civil society. And through this series, I actually have developed some great friendships and that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. This center is part of a network of Ismaili centers worldwide, including London, Vancouver, Lisbon, Dubai, Dushanbe, and the soon-to-be-built center in Houston. Tonight's tagline is really about getting past the rhetoric. We use this language unquestionably because we've been bombarded, all of us have been bombarded, regardless of whatever parts of the city we live in, about the headlines on housing and lots of assertions that have been made by pundits, by politicians. Everyone's talking about this, we know this. But you know that this is complicated. We know that this is complex. It brings together economics, it brings together supply, it brings together geography, it brings together values and ethics and commitment and courage. It brings together a need for policy overhaul and, honestly, crisis intervention. I am a social worker, from all levels of government, the private sector and the third sector. At the center of all of this, we know that younger and racialized Canadians have been left behind and underhoused. It's resulting in this gap that we continue to see between classes. And for those who have entered the housing market, particularly in the mid-1990s, benefited from an increase in housing values. Tonight is the first of the three-part series, and our intention is to think more deeply about this housing crisis. And today we'll socialize people to what's at stake. Our next session, and inshallah, it will be an iftar. And for those of you who don't know an iftar, it will be a breaking of the fast because it will be in the holy month of Ramadan. And that will focus on housing and immigration, how fitting for that month. And then our capstone will be in early June with a session really that connects the dots to housing and Canadian values. So you're not going to walk away today from really gaining answers, but you may get some solutions in your mind, and your call to action sheets on your paper will certainly speak to some of the things that you can do. But it's a starting point to make a dent. So let me briefly describe why we actually wanted to partner, particularly on the housing series, and for us how important this is at the Future Ready Initiative. Because the Future Ready Initiative was honestly designed as a social services delivery organization of the Aga Khan Council for Canada. It was to think about the most significant changes in the Ismaili community and those who we live within, which I mean the broader community. And so we developed 5 key areas of focus as we build back strong and resilient from the pandemic. It's going to reposition our community, and I really do hope so. And those 5 areas really relate to family mentorship, which is really a coordinated response that wraps around families who are living in vulnerability, livelihoods and the future of work, really addressing and the need to pivot to careers and business opportunities and ventures that hopefully are future-proof, mental health, so we can ensure that the community has access to good quality access to mental health in a timely way, youth mentorship, because we need to ensure that we nurture the leaders of tomorrow, and of course settlement excellence. And we know all about the resettlement efforts that are happening from countries of political unrest, climate disasters, and uncertainty. I'm really proud to note that since inception, which is April 2021, we've actually helped just over 2,000 members of the community in our family mentorship program, and also matched 300 youth with mentors for a 2-year period. We can talk a little bit more about that. At the heart of this is really what we want to think about is housing, and it intersects in many, many different ways. We think about our fundamental right to housing, which our national housing strategy really speaks to. And as a response to this, we need to continue to work with agencies like Habitat and with Generation Squeeze to really take some of this into our hands. I do want to talk a bit about our Generations project. Some of you may have heard about Generations. And Generations is, as you may know, really on a not-for-profit basis. It's a project that we have initiated here across Canada in Calgary, which has already been built, Toronto, Vancouver, Burnaby, Port Moody, and Laval. And I'll talk a little bit about the Generations project, which actually has broken ground just here at Winford and Don Mills. It's a 60-acre multi-residential land development located here at the corner of Don Mills and Eglinton. And it's a multi-generational housing complex, and it will incorporate affordable housing units for seniors and families, about 390 apartments. And it will be approximately 20% of those apartments will be dedicated to individuals and families in the city. There will be a long-term care facility as well, and it will include early childhood development. It will include a medical clinic. It will have offerings of primary health care and mental health, There'll be a pharmacy, there'll be spaces for cultural programming and education programming. There'll be a fitness center and a community kitchen that will produce daily low-cost meals for residents and seniors, certainly living in this surrounding area, which is highly dense. And we know projects like these continue to address and bring tangible solutions to the table, but all of us can't tinker around the edges, and we can't chip away only at that iceberg. We need to come together with shared values and advocate to ensure that we chart a path to change. I do want to share a little bit about my own story, and I want to say that my story is not unique. My family endured many struggles in India through the colonial period and into the liberation of the Indian independence. But what was apparent in their experience and the impacts of intergenerational trauma is resilience, and I use the term is resilience, drive, motivation, courage, determination, and hope. It reminds me of the book title, Where Hope Takes Root by His Highness the Aga Khan. My dad was born smack in the middle of partition and the Indian independence, into a family that was very well-to-do but lost everything because of the impacts of colonialism. My grandparents, dad and his brothers and his sister that passed away at a very tender age, they were not housed. They didn't have a house, they didn't have a mud hut. In India, we call that a jhupparpatti. They didn't have a box to call home. They were homeless. They took shelter in a Jamaatkhana, a place of worship, very similar to this in Dongri, India, in the middle of Mumbai. My dad used to tell me stories about how my grandmother would work in a canteen and cook for those who were privileged to eat, but she couldn't bring dinner back home for her family. I remember my dad telling me he used to rummage through the slums of India, selling small trinkets to make a living, and do whatever it took to build quality of life which made sense for him and his family. I remember him telling me that he used to love Indian mithai, Indian sweets, that when he would be so fortunate to get one, he would keep it in his pocket for days so he can have that taste to savor for that week. What we had were values that I spoke about: courage, determination, hope, etc. And it's important to note that my story, like I said, is not unique. It's the story of millions of people that come to Canada, that call their home. They're beside you, they're in front of you, they're behind you. We've all been impacted by this, either personally or vicariously through somebody else. But look, it was my grandmother, who was an independent Indian woman, a breadwinner in my family because my grandfather passed away when he was 4, and my dad, who committed themselves to breaking that cycle of poverty. They had agency to do so, they had opportunity to do so, and others paving the way. And so you fast forward a few decades, through multiple migrations, we ended up to Canada, a country of opportunity for all, working at the airport and then Grand and Toy, and through the support of others, my dad finished his career with the feds, with no education under him but grade 4, but a passion for learning and great math skills, which did not come to me. I'm always thank God for our CFO. I remember being 5 years old, and I was mentioning this to Paul and Ian, that my dad and my mom bought their first house in Scarborough for $75,000. Some of you in the audience will remember that. Their second house for $105,000, and their third house for $238,000 in 1999, just north of Steeles. There was a house that set course for my brother and I. We prospered as a family. At that time, we arrived, partly because we also lived north of Steeles. There was cachet to live in Markham at that particular time. The value that they gained, the equity that they gained in their home, got my brother and I through school, being the first in my family to get through post-secondary education and continuing to break that cycle of poverty. It took one generation, just one. That's it, not longer, just one generation. Isn't that contrary to what we're suggesting today? We've had arguments about this. Stall prices in the name of equity. It is more complex than that, and we will embark on a journey to understand why. And I think Paul and Ian will certainly share their wisdom with us on why. And the format of this evening will be as follows. So I'll turn it very soon to our two partner organizations, Paul of Generation Squeeze and Ian Underwood, CEO of Habitat for Humanity GTA. And Paul and Ian will spend a few minutes kind of framing the context of kind of what's at stake. And then our moderator, who we're very happy to have from CTV, Rahim Ladhani, will introduce the panel and lead that discussion. Paul and Ian will then return for a few minutes, so they're bookending as we speak, really reflecting on what we've learned, what we've heard, and the kind of themes and questions that would be useful for all of us to really engage together after the formal program. So I'm going to encourage you, indulge yourself, indulge me, to stay. There's samosas after, just letting you know. There will be, after our formal engagement here, there's going to be an informal event, and with really a wonderful opportunity to introduce yourselves to the speakers, to the partners of the organization, for the politicians that are among us. And I think at that time, it's your opportunity to ask questions, it's your opportunity to engage, certainly in dialogue. But before that, we are going to, and I'm going to see if this works, look at this. We're going to actually have a poll for the audience. And I'm going to ask those of you who don't have data on your mobile phone, if you do have a mobile phone, you see the Wi-Fi coordinates there. Our Wi-Fi is Centre Wi-Fi, and our password is Centre Wi-Fi. Of course, that is probably the easiest thing that anyone could ever do. Or you can use your own data on your phone. And so I'll just wait a couple of seconds until you can grab the Wi-Fi coordinates. Of course, use your own data as well. Okay. So I'm going to ask you now, and this is going to be in real time, which will be really cool, is scan the QR code. You see the QR code on the screens, the two monitors in front of you, and the screens, I believe, I can't see them, but I believe we're projecting that as well. You could also go to slido.com, and you have the number there that will prompt you to this poll. And the question is, what best describes your current housing situation? So I'm a property owner, I'm renting a property, I live with others. So we'll just wait until this comes up. We'll just wait a couple of minutes here. And this is really interesting information. I really hope that you also took an opportunity to go to the Aga Khan Museum. The Aga Khan Museum is free from 4 to 8 on Wednesdays. And we've purposely actually had our series on Wednesdays so you can take part in participating at the Aga Khan Museum. So I really hope that, that you guys did go. Okay, so 68% of those of you who are in the room are a property owner. 15% of you are renting a property. Okay, about 6% live with others, and we have 1% of other, including students. Interesting information here. Okay. I'll leave that with you, Ian and Paul, to really unpack. Okay, so we're going to go to another exercise, so don't shut your phones off yet. Oh. Scott, are you coming to the rescue? Awesome. All right, so we're going to do a word cloud together on the same Slido. And how are you feeling about housing in the GTA? So you can type in how you're feeling. Are you feeling, well, I'm not going to lead you into anything, so perhaps I will reserve myself for that. Sad, horrible, inaccessible, anxious, pessimistic, concerned, worried, hopeful, okay, not affordable, straightforward, speculation, distraught, falling, oh my God, it's like doom and gloom, despair, resentful, okay. Paul and Ian, this is, particularly Paul, this is good information for you as you come on here. Wow. Too expensive, yellow belt. I'm not sure what yellow belt means, but okay, underzoned, policy. Okay, hopeful. I think I'm going to certainly hang my hat on that one. Meh. Okay. Well, on that note, what I'll do is you keep on adding to that word cloud. It is being projected right now, and I'm going to ask my dear friends Ian and Paul to come here and take us to town.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Aleem, for that lovely introduction for the evening. To our guests, and let us take our hats off to you and the Ismaili Centre for welcoming us to this beautiful setting to talk about a really important issue for our communities throughout the GTA. My name is Paul Kershaw. I am a professor at the University of British Columbia, so I'm the visitor today, but I'm also the founder of Generation Squeeze, which is a national charity that operates not just as a think tank, but a think and change tank. We champion generational fairness in order to preserve what Canadians typically hold to be sacred, like a healthy home, a healthy childhood, a healthy planet. And we do that so that we can all leave a proud legacy. Our network includes an alliance of more than 37,000, the largest number of whom reside here in Toronto. And so we are delighted to be able to join with our partners tonight, the Future Ready Initiative, the Ismaili Centre here in Toronto, with Habitat for Humanity GTA, to embark on a conversation that aims to push through the typical kind of rhetoric about housing that I hear at most other housing sessions that I go to, and I do this regularly and have done so for many years. And as we push through the typical rhetoric, I think we're going to explore not just a range of ideas, but a range of the kinds of feelings that people just identified in our word cloud. Feelings that I suspect are going to include grief, because something sacred has been lost in Toronto. There once was a Canadian dream that hard work could bring into reach a good home. If you look at this blue line on the chart before you, this blue line summarizes average home prices in Toronto from 1976 onward. See how it has gone up and up and up relentlessly compared to the orange line, and that orange line reflects typical full-time earnings for a young person. Whereas in 1976, it took 6 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average priced home in the city, it now takes a soul-crushing 28 years of work. And the yellow lines, I'm not sure if you can see them so easily, I can't from here with my middle-aged eyes. The yellow lines show how far home prices would need to drop in Toronto by 75%, or how much young people's earnings would need to increase, more than quadruple, in order to bring home prices into reach. Now, those yellow lines are a fiction. And as a result, we're going to experience feelings of stress. You certainly saw that in the word cloud. Stress because as more people are locked out of home ownership, many, many more are facing the reality that rents have more than doubled after adjusting for inflation, because we have more people competing for a scarce number of rental units. And that's going to lead to a great deal of anger. I think that we saw some of that in the word cloud as well, because many of us are mad at those we hold responsible for the loss of this dream. And sometimes we'll blame the foreign buyer, the speculator, the mean-spirited realtor or developer, the NIMBY who won't allow us to have a new rental building in our community, the money launderer. But I also think we're going to talk at moments about a feeling of being a little bit entangled. And I think to some degree, Aleem's story has really helped me understand this a bit more. Aleem's family story and how many of us have become shaped by a cultural context and a policy context where we see high and rising home prices as being important to our own efforts to grow our security, grow our wealth, grow our savings for retirement, grow our ability to invest in our children. And for some, and I'll admit myself included, this might motivate at certain moments a sense of guilt, because the dream that hard work could bring a good home in reach has been lost on our watch. We may not have intended it, but we also didn't prevent it. And at certain moments, I wonder, for the almost 66 or 67% of homeowners in the room, those like me who've been in the housing market for some time, that we may not have prevented the loss of that dream, in part because the high and rising home prices were helpful for us, contributing to our wealth, making us more affluent, having more options. And this reminds us that high and rising home prices aren't just uniformly bad. They certainly are harmful to young folks and newcomers of any age. But they have made others of us, myself included, more prosperous. I know of what I speak. In the last several years alone, my home has gone up by $1 million while I slept. But guilt is a lousy motivating feeling. And so we won't linger there long and instead search for renewed purpose. A shared purpose that likely can bring us a sense of possibility and, as Aleem so rightly emphasized, hope. It may be the case that some of us, many of us, myself included, have been too much on the sidelines as home prices have left earnings behind, raising prosperity for some, causing unaffordability for others. But now there remains time to get off the sidelines. And as we do, we can follow those who come forward and said, let's think about a wider us, not just ourselves and our immediate family, and a longer now, not just our immediate interests, but what do we want to restore that has been lost from Toronto? What do we want to build in the future for the very first time? And when we do that, we will join in a mission together to restore the affordability that has been lost in Toronto. And I think that we can do so guided by a principle that says, homes first, investment second. There will always be an investment component to housing. But I suspect going forward, we'll increasingly have to think that that investment component needs to be a secondary goal. A goal indeed, but a secondary one to first and foremost, retaining housing as homes. And so with that, I'm so excited to be engaging with all of you this evening, listening to our fantastic panel, and handing it over now to the inspirational, talented, and motivational Lean Underwood, CEO of Habitat for Humanity.
Thanks very much, Paul. And it's so wonderful seeing how full the room is tonight, and it's a reflection of what we saw on the screen. As you've heard, I'm CEO here at Habitat for Humanity for the Greater Toronto Area, and it's always fun to ask, hands up if you've heard of Habitat for Humanity. A number of people have, so very well-recognized charity. And keep your hands up if you've volunteered for, donated, shopped at our restores. Thank you very much for being such a significant part of our work. We are a well-recognized name. We are, for those not familiar with us, we are a global housing charity with a single vision. So operating in every continent around the world, in every province and territory in Canada, in every state of the US, single vision, a world where everyone has a safe and decent place to live. And we're passionate about that vision for the same reasons it brought you here, because we fundamentally believe that a decent home is foundational for every individual to be able to thrive. It's foundational for getting a good night's sleep. It's foundational for being able to start the day ready for a good day at school or a good day at work. It's foundational for being able to build strong family relationships. It's foundational for health, as our panel, I'm sure, will be reminding us tonight. And it's certainly foundational for having the mind space to be able to dream and create and not just be focused on how do I get through this day and how do I pay the rent this month. And at Habitat, our focus on that notion of a decent place to live, we have focused in particular on helping working families who face barriers on realizing the strength and the stability of a home that they own. And our focus on home ownership is not inspired by the Canadian dream that Paul made reference to. Our origin story actually goes back to the racially segregated American Deep South in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and an organization that was called Koinonia, or Koinonia Farms. And Koinonia was a place where they were using home ownership as a way to help sharecroppers, the vast majority of whom were descendants of former slaves, and they were legally free, but they were economically entirely dependent on the landowners for whom they worked. They lived in shacks on the land where they worked. They paid rent out of the meager earnings to the landowners. And so they were still in a cycle of not getting ahead. And the whole idea of koinonia was, let's, mobilize local citizens who have, people who may have time, talent, or money that can help and work side by side with these shareholders and help them first build their homes and then take what was otherwise their rent and turn it into equity payments and then build a base to have a Aleem's story of generational progress and change. And so fast forward here to Habitat GTA, we've been applying those same principles of what became Habitat for Humanity, a decent place to live, an affordable mortgage, an ability to build equity, and we've been applying those to work with families to help create the kind of stories that Aleem talked about. And as you can appreciate, and many of you have been involved in us, it's incredibly inspiring and gratifying work. But it has also been really disheartening over these last 30 years of Habitat, and particularly these last 10, to see what has changed here in our community and arguably in our nation. To the point where today, and when you think of it, 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, affordable housing affordability was something that we kind of thought about at the margins. Right? It was something that organizations like Habitat for Humanity, some help from our government partners, can address, and everybody else will be fine on their own. And today we are here because the words on the screen said it's very different now. And certainly in the GTA and arguably across Canada. Habitat for Humanity Canada commissioned a poll of Canadians last fall, and the themes they reported on were very reflective of what we're feeling here. They found that 89% of Canadians living in the GTA believe that the dream of home ownership is rapidly disappearing for most. 58% of folks in the GTA are worried about whether their children will be able to afford to live here as adults. 72% of people in the GTA believe that if we had more affordable housing, we would be able to address many of the social and economic issues facing our communities and arguably our nation. And so, same theme as you've heard from my other partners. This is why we are so excited at Habitat to be in this partnership and to be here with all of you tonight. And so, as you've heard, this is the first of a three-part series, but we want in every session to not just talk about what's the problem, but to really challenge ourselves of what can we do as individual citizens. Paul and I will come back and talk a bit more about the latter part shortly, but now I want to turn it over to our panel. It is my great honor to introduce Rahim Ladhani, a face that many of you will recognize from CTV. He joined CTV News in 2014. He is now the weekend news anchor for CTV News Toronto, a familiar face also during the week. Enough from me, over to Rahim and our panel.
Thank you, Ian and Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. How's everyone doing this evening? Doing well? All right. So my name is Rahim Ladhani, and I'm going to be the moderator for our esteemed panel this evening. And as we get into our discussion, I think it's important that we take a moment to reflect on some of the insights that were shared by Paul, Ian, and Aleem. When we talk about affordable housing in the Greater Toronto Area, the truth of the matter is that we as a society and a community, we're not in an enviable position, right? We just heard some of the sobering realities. What that does in terms of the statistics and the stories, it might have made us feel a little uncomfortable, a little sad, and as Paul mentioned, maybe even a little guilt. The question we're faced with now, though, is how do we harness those feelings into taking an active role, into actually creating long-term, sustainable, and multi-generational solutions for those who need it the most. The fact of the matter is that each and every one of us in this room, it doesn't matter about our age, our ethnicity, our cultural background, our socioeconomic status, or our profession. Each of us sitting in this room this evening are sitting here in a position of privilege. That's okay. But all of us also have an obligation now. we have an obligation to ensure that this city doesn't turn into a city of privilege, and that the city of Toronto remains a city of opportunities. It needs to remain an opportunity for students, for young professionals, for the elderly, and for newcomers into our country. And so that's what I want all of us to keep in mind this evening, because the only way we're going to achieve that vision is by addressing the housing shortfall. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our panel for this evening. We have a beautiful panel, so please, let's welcome our panel. Why don't we do that? We have Jan DeSilva. She is the president and CEO at the Toronto Regional Board of Trade. We have Dr. Sacha Bhatia. He's a population health and value-based care executive with Ontario Health. And Eric Lombardi, a housing advocate and the founder of More Neighbours Toronto. Thank you all for being here. Jen, I want to bring you into the conversation first. When we talk about housing, housing is such a priority for Toronto's economic and social well-being. From your perspective, what's your assessment of the current landscape and how is this impacting our city?
Thanks, Rahim. And I just want to say thanks, Ian, Paul. It's so hard to follow you, Paul. You're just so dynamic on stage, and Ian, you've got such a powerful message. I think the theme of tonight is the title of tonight, What's at Stake? And what's at stake is livability and our standard of living. And if I could just talk about that a little bit. Some stats about Toronto. We're a region generating 1/4 of Canada's economic activity, 5 million jobs in Greater Toronto. We attract more than 50% of Canada's newcomers. Toronto, the fastest growing city in the US and Canada. Our region is the second fastest growing. The city is the fastest growing. So tremendous stats, so much success in this region. But the reality is that our livability infrastructure, that's housing, that's people movement, hasn't kept pace. We're decades behind where we need to be, and while there's lots of attention to solving this, there's no fast-track solutions. We're in a vicious circle. Lack of housing affordability is exacerbating labor shortages, not least of which is a massive shortage of construction workers. We have 100,000 fewer people in construction than we need to catch up on housing. And so here's where the challenge between livability and our standard of living intersects. Inadequate housing supply is putting pressure on affordability. Businesses, particularly essential businesses, are finding it increasingly difficult to recruit and retain workers. Workers who can ply their trades anywhere, nurses, teachers, paramedics, tradespeople, are choosing less expensive communities with shorter commute times while often earning as much as they could make in a job in the city of Toronto. And many of the essential jobs in our city are in sectors that provide no wage premium for cost of living here. So for example, for GTA, the wage premium for elementary and secondary school teachers is effectively zero, meaning that teachers who move elsewhere in the province will earn the same salary but have less cost facing them in terms of the cost of living. Very true about the healthcare sector. I know, Sacha, you'll speak to that. The second biggest employment zone in the country is around Pearson Airport. It's the logistics area that meant during the pandemic we could work from home. It's Amazon, it's Walmart, it's Canada Post. 350,000 workers work in this zone, average of $40,000 of income. The zone itself sits on the corner of 4 cities, provincial and federal lands, so there is no public transit network that gets there. So imagine how far a worker making $40,000 a year has to drive to get to their job. And therefore, there's a huge attraction and retention issue for workers in that area. So clearly, livability and standard of living is critical to these workers. And it's also understandable, well, as soon as they can find a job closer to home or in a cheaper part of the province, they'll take jobs there. But it also holds livability and standard of living challenges for every one of us. Imagine if we cannot attract enough teachers to teach our children in the city, if we can't attract enough nurses to provide care in the city. And in my mind, this has been the missing message on our years-long march to push for more housing. So let me just wind things up with a few thoughts on what I see as next steps, what I'd encourage us to be thinking about from an action perspective. The Yellow Belt came up. That's the 70% of neighborhoods in the city that are designated single family only. We've got to tear up that piece of paper and get rid of that exclusionary zoning. We need to vastly increase our stock of missing middle. Triplexes. The city of Montreal is beautiful. Triplexes everywhere. No reason we couldn't have that. This would be a welcome change, but it's not just tearing up those old zoning rules. It's also putting a fast track system in place. I know, Paul, you're from Vancouver area. The new mayor that was elected there has some ideas. Laneway housing's approved, so he has an idea of saying he'll have 3 pre-approved plans. If you pick one of those 3 plans for your laneway, just get on with it. It doesn't have to go back and forth and back and forth. So I think it's not only getting the right zoning in place, it's getting the right processes in place to get the right outcome. The second thing is workforce housing. Sunnybrook Hospital has lots of land available around the hospital, and they've got a real challenge getting nurses. Let's look at what we can do to help them build nursing housing on site as a way of solving some of the challenges they're facing. The universities talk about this as well. Early in their tenure, faculty don't make a lot of money, so to be able to house them on site would make a lot of sense. So lots we can be doing with workforce housing. Third, newcomers. 50% of Canada's immigration comes to this region, and we appreciate it and we need that. The challenge, however, is unlike the province of Quebec, Ontario and the City of Toronto don't get any funding support from the federal government for the settlement of these newcomers. In the case of Montreal, the first 2 years are funded by the feds. That creates a lot of support to make sure you've got capacity in housing, you've got capacity in other things you need. And the final thought about what we need to do is we all need to make it matter. We need to break through inertia. We need to break through everything that's slowing us down. We need to build momentum. Because here's the thing. As Paul said, housing is not somebody else's problem. It's all of our problem. It's livability and standard of living for everyone. So I really look forward to our discussion tonight. It matters so much, and we need to make it matter louder.
It's very well said. And you talked a lot about labor shortages and the trickle-down effect that it'll have on the economy. And I think that just goes to the intricacies that housing has, because there are so many different elements that can benefit but also suffer if we don't address the long-term solutions. And I think another one of those details is health, and that's where we bring in Dr. Bhatia. Many people might not think right away housing and health are connected. Why are they so interconnected?
Thanks, Rahim, and for the question. And I just want to thank the Ismaili Centre and Habitat for Humanity and Generation Squeeze for inviting me and all of you coming today. I mean, this is it's such a critical topic, and I want to say right up front, I'm not a housing expert, so please don't ask me about zoning bylaws or anything like that. But I'll speak about this from 3 perspectives. The first is as a health system planner. At any given time, like in the pandemic, I don't think there was ever a time when we thought so much, or the general public thought so much about the impact of our healthcare system and, really what it meant in our daily lives. And things like health system capacity came up a lot. In fact, we shifted, we put in pandemic restrictions because we needed to protect the capacity in our hospitals. At any given time, 10% of the hospital beds in this province are taken up by people who don't need to be there for an acute medical reason. They're there because they don't have another place to go, either because they don't have access to good supportive housing, long-term care, or other sorts of affordable places that they can go, and many of them are homeless. And the reality is that has an impact on everybody. Because if you need your surgery done, if you need a bed, for your hip replacement, if you come in with a heart attack, the reality is that there, at any given time in the hospital, are going to be pressures because we have people who are there because, frankly, we just don't have another place for them to go. And it's not good care, because a hospital is not the right place, and we're not equipped to be able to take care of people on a long-term chronic basis. We're there to treat your heart attack, we're there to treat your hip fracture, we're there to treat you if you come in with a motor vehicle accident. We're not equipped for that sort of long-term piece. And there was just an article in the Toronto Star today, of people who are basically housed long-term at hospitals for years because they don't have another place to go. And so, when you start to think about what is the interconnectedness and the impact on health, from a health system planner, I basically have to plan for 2,100 more beds than I would otherwise need, because I have excess capacity. I don't have enough capacity to take care of people, because there are people there that, if we had good other options like affordable housing, they wouldn't have to be there, and we wouldn't have to need so many hospital beds. So that's the first thing. The second is talking about this as a doctor. So I'm a practicing cardiologist at Toronto General, and just walk around the emergency room with me. At any given time, you will see people who are in the emergency room because of an acute exacerbation of a chronic illness, because of a mental health condition that went awry, because of the fact that they had a complication of their diabetes, in large part because of the fact that they don't have housing. Because think about it. Are you really going to care about your diabetes and managing your blood sugars if you don't have a place to live? How is somebody going to get better and recover from their mental health condition if they, frankly, don't have a place to live? Are they going to care about their medication and being compliant with medication if the first thing they're thinking about is, where am I going to, is there a place for me to live tonight? And the reality is, as a physician, we see that every day in our emergency rooms, and that creates worse health outcomes. And there's really good data that, in fact, housing interventions like supportive housing actually helps reduce medical complications of chronic illness. People live longer, they have fewer heart attacks, they have fewer exacerbations of chronic illness. And so, frankly, not to be economic about it, that saves our healthcare system money, which actually is better for everybody. And I'll say the third thing, and I'll pick up on Jan's comment, and I'll end with this, is I'll speak as a caregiver. So, 15 months ago, my father came to live with me because he unfortunately had a fall at home. He's 85 years old and had a spinal cord injury requiring surgery. And now we have a suite of caregivers that come in and help us take care of him, because it's difficult for him to take care of himself, and we keep him at home. One of the biggest challenges, and we've had huge challenges in terms of actually having a stable cadre of people who will come and help us out. And why? Because they can't afford to live in the city, and we live in the city. And so, as a consequence, people have to travel sometimes an hour or two by transit to make, $25, $30 an hour as a caregiver taking care of my dad. And the reality is this is a reality for so many people. So when we think about the fact that as of 2025, over 20% of Ontarians are going to be over the age of 65, my dad's story is not going to be unique. There are a lot of people that are going to need care. They're going to need their kids to be taught. They're going to need to be, if we want to truly age in place, we need a workforce that's actually going to be able to live and afford to live in the city where they're going to be providing care, they're going to be working. And if we don't make those things available to them, the healthcare crisis is just going to get worse. So I would say, honestly, this is an important, you wouldn't think about it, but actually if we truly want to preserve our healthcare system and make it truly equitable and actually affordable and frankly sustainable, we're going to need to tackle the housing issue.
And I think one of the ways that we can also lead to better health outcomes is by having affordable housing in every neighborhood across the Greater Toronto Area, not just certain segments. And I know Eric's been sitting patiently here, and I know that's your bread and butter. So if you can, let's start with maybe shedding some light on what More Neighbours Toronto is all about, the work that you do, and then get into the path that you kind of see in terms of how are we going to get to long-term solutions.
Of course, and I want to just start by thanking Habitat for Humanity, Generation Squeeze, the Ismaili Centre, and then all of the panelists, and of course, everyone attending tonight who, to some degree, is here because they care, and you care. So I just want to start off by thanking you. More Neighbours we found in 2021, middle of the year, so we're a relatively new organization, and we exist for one purpose alone, which is to end the housing crisis. And that is a simple purpose, but a very complex challenge. And the reason why I got into this space and into advocacy in the first place is because this issue matters so much. I grew up in the Western GTA, and I went to school at the University of Waterloo. And when I look at my peer group, I'm 28 by the way, more than half have left the GTA or the country. Of my friends from university, it's actually more like 70%. The reason why is because they do not see a future for themselves here. When I look at my peers now in Toronto, more than half are either planning to move away or considering it, because once again, people are more than what their careers are. So we can talk about workers and workforce housing. We can talk about a teacher or a nurse. But I can just give you an example with two of my friends who are considering moving away. One is a nurse, and her partner is a logistics dispatcher. She grew up with me in Oakville, and he grew up in North Mississauga. They cannot find a place anywhere near anything in the GTA that would allow them to have the family that they want to. And that is a very simple dream. And at the end of the day, what we've allowed to happen as a result of this housing crisis is that we've stolen the small dreams that used to matter in the society from young people. It's the same thing for a lot of new immigrants as well. When you look at just polling of recent immigrants, you look at 2021, 75% of eligible permanent residents chose to become citizens. Now it's less than 50%. If you ask recent immigrants to Toronto, they'll tell you 30% of them that they don't actually plan to stay in Canada anymore, and 30% don't know if they'll be able to stay, and the main reason is the cost of housing. And so very quickly we are becoming a transient city where people don't see a future from themselves. They come here, they get some experience, and they go. And then the culture of the place that we call home declines. We've seen the housing chart, and in just 15 years, the price of housing has tripled. And incomes have gone up potentially 30%, which is just one-tenth of that. And the consequence of this is a lot of people who would have otherwise been open to owning housing rent. But because we're not building enough of any housing of any kinds, we're also see rental income, rents explode. And so the future that people dream of when they come to a country like Canada just isn't there anymore. And as rents go up, a very unfortunate number of people end up in precarious housing situations and on the street. And I'm just going to ask the audience, raise your hand if you think we have a increasing poverty and homelessness problem in the city. All right, raise your hand if you believe that Toronto should be a place where we don't think twice about walking over someone. So, you can see by the hands that, we value being able to take care of people, and we don't want to turn a blind eye to the neighbors who are frankly more often on the streets than they used to be. So what we have in this country is a gap between what our values say and the outcomes we have. And at the end of the day, that is a political choice. What does it say about us when, the only way to be able to make it in this city is to have rich parents? What happens when the only way to live here is to be handed down wealth, and everyone else who we depend on for the quality of life that we expect here cannot truly ever make it their home? Does that sound like a liberal society? It doesn't to me. What does it mean when we can't have people to take care of us when we get sick? Who is going to teach our children? Who's going to drive the bus that we rely on? We need to be a place that is actually open, and that's going to require us as a society to consider, what is the self-interest, and then what is our collective interest. And when I think about, what is at stake in our society, I think, it's a very simple answer. What's at stake in our society is our soul. Who are we? What can people achieve here? I loved Aleem's story, and I think it's actually at the heart of the Canadian identity. The idea of that first or second generation immigrant family that comes to the GTA or Toronto or Canada, and they make it. That is the heart of who we are, because that story is so common for so many of us. And that story has become a myth, and that's a shame. And so when we think about what's at stake, it is our prosperity, it is the quality of our institutions, it's our healthcare system, it's the beauty in our ability to actually create nice places, because we increasingly can't afford to do that either, right? So in this conversation, we actually, one of the things that More Neighbours exists to do is to drive the conversation about why change and growth is necessary, why neighborhood change can actually enrich the places that we live in, because change can be positive, right? Welcoming more neighbors to a community, for example, we talked about the Yellow Belt, will actually enable services in those communities to get better. We'll enable people to have opportunities to live close to their aging parents or their friends and family and the communities together as they grow. We're losing those opportunities, and we are losing our culture, we're losing our social contract. We absolutely have to fix that, because at the end of the day, that's what we as Canadians and Torontonians believe and value. Thanks.
To pick up on what you were saying, Eric, I know you talked about the values and the gap between self and collective. I think when we talk about this conversation, we often hear the word NIMBY, which Paul touched upon, which is not in my backyard. Or another word is that we need to retain community character. And those words, they stop buildings from being built in every neighborhood in the GTA. So my question to you, Eric, is how do we get people to change the mindset? How do we get people to understand that having pluralism in their community, having mixed income communities actually create stronger communities?
I think one of the things, particularly in housing policy, and I don't mean to get too technical on everyone, we overprescribe, and the consequence of that is we create places that aren't meant to feel engaging when we're building things. And so one of the challenges that we have is, how can we actually build a lot of community-oriented multifamily housing where people can experience the people who live in those places as neighbors, right? And people worry a lot about the changes in infrastructure around them. They don't want to be inconvenienced by additional traffic, not knowing that new growth might actually bring more places they could actually walk to in their neighborhoods, not because they're forced to, but because they want to. We have this conversation about 15-minute cities and new main streets. I mean, historic districts across the region are highly valuable because we don't build them anymore, right? So I think the challenge of overcoming NIMBYism is about helping people understand the future of what their neighborhood looks like will actually feel better. They'll have more opportunities to meet new people in third places, which in a lot of suburbs you don't have. That's that place that's not home or work where you can still run into and meet people. These places are the foundation of communities worldwide, and we've made them legal. And so, being able to get to people that the changes and rules that we need mean that we're actually going to build better places for people to live, I just think is paramount. And I think people are finally understanding that too.
Sacha, I want to ask you, you talked about the poor health incomes that people in the city of Toronto are dealing with today. What role does government play in addressing those needs?
Yes, great question.
By the way, you have a front row seat.
Yeah,
right there.
fair
You can
enough.
address them,
So
yeah.
I think here's the conundrum, because we all, I think here, think that we should solve homelessness, right? I would say probably one of the most important things that we could do from a health system perspective is actually get people off the street and get them into from a health outcomes perspective, from a health system perspective. And the reality is that it actually would be cost saving. I mean, there's really good data to say that if we could solve the homelessness problem, our institutions, it would save you as taxpayers money, because where do people who are homeless end up going? Mostly into places that are more expensive than actually the house that they would be getting. Either it is in hospitals, it's in jails, it's in shelters, or other institutions. They have complications that cost you in the health system money. The problem is that so money is saved. You, the taxpayer, actually spend less if we were to solve this problem. The problem is who actually benefits from that investment. And so we have 3 levels of government, right? I'm the health guy. I would benefit, but I don't control the housing stock. I'm not the one who ultimately has purview over that. Then there's the federal government, and then there's the city. And this is this challenge that we have where it's like, how are we all going to get together and recognize that this is a problem that is worth solving, because actually all citizens will benefit from it. And I think there's got to be a way that we can get together and say, okay, there's a health aspect to this, there is a provincial aspect to this, a federal aspect to this, and a municipal aspect to this. Let's get together and solve it, because it's going to benefit everybody.
Okay, I just need to jump in here, because here's the thing. The city can't afford every problem it's trying to solve, because other orders of government need to be at the table. And I would point to Toronto Community Housing. We're the only city in Canada that has responsibility for this. It was downloaded decades ago. We need to push it back to the levels of government that have the revenue, because the city simply doesn't have it. And I would argue the same thing on the homelessness problem. Most of it has to do mental health and other addiction issues. There's a large part of that contributing to it. Healthcare is within the province's purview. So it really, I know we've got great counselors, former counselors sitting in the audience here, but we've got to be pushing hard, because we're trying to throw pennies at this with city budget that we just don't have, and we're just not the right place to solve it here.
Yep. I would also say on the healthcare front, if doctors could prescribe housing as we would actually be in a lot better shape, right? Because it is a huge factor in our costs, and at the end of the day, if a doctor says, do you want your housing is inadequate, it's the main reason why you're having healthcare problems. Our provincial government needs to be accountable for that.
Well, I'd love to find the pharmacy that we could get the housing prescription, filled from, for sure.
We're not picking on you.
I don't mind. This happens to me every day, so no problem at all.
Jan, I want to ask you about municipalities in terms of rewarding good behavior, in terms of if this is a feasible option, because I think some people think, you know what, if we reward municipalities for welcoming more neighbors, for building more triplexes or small apartments, as you talked about, if there was a carrot there, would they be more incentivized to do that, and what kind of incentives, and would this work, or is that just a dream?
I almost want to, and Josh, I'm in Josh's writing as well. Look, I'm struggling with what the incentives would be, because the pressure on city council, on our councillors who represent wards, and where wards don't want things to change because they've had to save up for 28 years to make that down payment and get in there, very nervous about anything that's going to change the financial deal that they have with real estate. So I struggle with the fact that I'm not sure where the incentive needs to go, other than all of the community making this a movement and making this matter. And again, reflecting on the fact, if nurses and paramedics and teachers can't afford to live and work here, all of us are going to suffer, so we need to figure that out. So I don't know, but I would welcome comments from our elected officials on this as well, because there's so much pressure to keep the status quo as opposed to doing what needs to be done. And the final thing I'll say, I've just come back from about 2.5 weeks in Asia. every jurisdiction I was in there is seized with the social condition their people face. They're focused on housing. There's government housing being built in wide swaths. It's an important part of the contract that they have to their citizens. And in those markets, you see less of the disruptive political environment that we have, and it's not even the disruption around citizenry at the moment, where there's so many people that feel left out and on the outside, and it's creating a lot of challenges for us as a country. So I think there's lots of lessons we can take globally. I don't know where the incentive lies, but I do think that if every one of us is convincing 3 or 4 friends who didn't think otherwise, you'd have a bigger parade to create some momentum.
I actually want to jump in on this question because I think it's an important one, and we ask a lot of our municipalities in general, and I would say even at the municipal level, the incentives to really be bold just aren't there. So yeah, you can dangle a carrot in front of 441 municipalities in this province, but that carrot isn't going to look the same to each and every one of them. And so what we really have a big gap on is the province being a leader and also providing a stick. So we're actually seeing in other jurisdictions that that higher level of government is coming into play and saying, no, you can't really fuss around with this. You have to build it, or there's going to be consequences for you in your municipality if you don't. Or we're just going to go around you in general. And so there is a avenue for the city, and I think in Ontario we're seeing the province pressure the city to do those things, but every single thing the province can do, the city can do, the province can do for them. And so on this issue in particular, the province needs to kind of put its foot down and say, municipalities, we want to hear what you have to say. We want to make sure the funding is there so that you can do the things that you're responsible for. But fundamentally, new paradigm. And until that happens, I don't see how municipalities solve the problem.
We're running out of time here, and so we're just going to squeeze in just one more question, and we'll do a rapid fire for each of you just to answer. And that's, everyone here in this audience today, they're here because they want to be here. They want to be part of the solution. If there's one thing that you would prioritize that someone in the audience can do, that someone could go and talk to their coworkers tomorrow about, what would that be that would bring us one step closer towards achieving the ultimate goal?
It's what I was talking about. This is about our standard of living for everyone going forward. So we've got to start reflecting on housing in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's talk to your elected officials.
It's time to end exclusionary zoning. Multiplexes and small apartments need to be legal everywhere.
That's a good point. Thank you very much. And as I hand the mic back to Pauline, I just want to say, thank you all for being here, because it really shows initiative and a keen interest that you want to be active participants. And it doesn't matter whether you're a baby boomer, a politician, or a developer. It doesn't matter where you are in your stage of life. We all have a role to play, and no matter what, when you identify that incentive that you can actually take an active role in, we need to seize that. We need to seize it, because the power in each of us comes from all of us. So thank you very much, and we'll hand the mic back to Pauline.
Keep in mind, it's you, me, and Aleem are in the way of samosas.
I know, but that was such good conversation. I'd like to be in the way, but I promise we won't. But so much rich information there. It's sort of Mama's little, I'm not sure if tensions we're emerging that we want to explore more, but I think we have a chance each to say 2 things that stand out for us. Can you share your first observation?
Of my 4.
Oh, but that's the samosa problem.
One thing I really appreciate about the panel is many times at Habitat for Humanity we'll get into conversations and people will say, look, if people can't afford to live here, they should just move to Thunder Bay or Saskatoon, and stop complaining. And if you follow a lot of the comments in social media, I notice that comes up a lot. Well, why don't people just go live somewhere they can afford? And in some respects, I think the pandemic and the work from home for the 60% of us who may have that opportunity some of the time, lulled especially the decision makers into a sense that, yeah, it's okay, people can work from home. And so what I really appreciate about the panel is just how much it's brought back we need a city where everyone can afford to live. For me, I think a couple of things that jump out, and Eric picked up on it, as did Jan. It does mean our neighborhoods, the shape of our neighborhoods have to change. And so kind of the conversations we can have afterwards with each other is, how do we ourselves get better at influencing that? At being able to say, yeah, that building's going to create some shadows. Yeah, that building's going to create more traffic on my street, but I got to stand up and say yes to that building. And so just how do we have those conversations? How do we push people to say, yes to housing is a big part of this. I'm going to pause there and let you jump in.
Well, I want to pick on two things. I think I'm going to end with Eric. So I'll start with Sacha. And maybe I'm doing that because I am a professor in the School of Population Health at UBC. And I think Sacha made clear tonight that housing unaffordability makes people sick, causes people to die early. And we've had a very significant conversation about our healthcare crisis of late. The most common questions in the public go, how much more money do we put to treat people's illness? What share of that ought we put into a private or a public setting? And increasingly, what proportion of that ought to go to remuneration, Sacha, for doctors? These are all important questions, but even their best answers will never make us healthy, because our medical care system wasn't designed to promote well-being. It was designed to address people's illness after they fall sick. And so if we want to transform healthcare, we need to listen to Sacha tonight. We need to invest where health begins. It's where we're born, grow, live, work, and age. Those are our neighborhoods. That means investing in social issues like housing and poverty reduction and childcare and reconciliation more urgently than we even increase spending on medical care to treat illness. We have an Ontario budget coming up fast and furiously, March 28th. Might be largely baked, but I hope that this year and especially in future years, we find a better balance investing where health begins by comparison with only investing in treating illness after the fact, or primarily doing that. If you're interested in that, check out a new initiative called Get Well Canada, getwellcanada.ca. You can find out more about that, where Eric said, let's prescribe more affordable housing. Doctors can't do that individually, but we as a society absolutely can.
Yeah, so I think the other piece in this, so something we haven't talked a lot about tonight is just how incredibly hard it is to build housing, how hard it is to get anything approved. Some of us in the room are kind of in that group that we build stuff, and it's really hard and it's really complicated. And solving this problem we're talking about is really, really complicated. And so the place that takes us is we as voters have to raise our tolerance on policy changes that our elected governments make that are messier. And so we unfortunately do not have the luxury of time anymore to do this elegantly. And it does mean somehow we have to embolden our friends who we elect to do things that even we're not going to like. Right? And that may look messy. And it's been interesting because last fall there's been lots of media coverage about some of the provincial government changes, right? And most of the coverage is negative. It's what people do agree is it's the broadest sweeping kind of attempted housing legislation we've ever seen. And so it's not a surprise, it's messy. Right? And so in some it's messy and there's a whole bunch of stuff they'll have to fix. We as citizens have to get better at electing our municipal governments and tolerating the mess, demanding that they be bold, and then tolerating there's going to be some mess. It doesn't feel Canadian. It's not the way, it's different than how we're used to doing things in Canada, but because we don't have the luxury of time, this again, and this is what I'd urge in the conversations afterward, have a bit of the conversation. How do we raise our tolerance, talk to people, around our dining room tables and folks that we talk to? How do we raise our tolerance around the messiness? I'm going to squeeze my last comment in and then back to you. Because I really appreciate that Sacha, in many of the comments, brought us back to, we talk a lot about the folks who work and have jobs. Many of them need help from organizations organizations like Habitat for Humanity, like all kinds along the way. There was a report from Scotiabank last month in January that said we need to double the amount of social housing. So subsidized, affordable housing. And we do, and it's going to cost a lot of money. But we have to double it for all the reasons the panel just talked about. And so that's another piece of just how do we drive that, and again, how do we embolden, how do we give our politicians permission and mandate to make the tax changes, the policy changes, the way they sell land, you know, when they have surplus land and what they demand from affordability. That is on us. Like, we're the ones that either embolden or meeken's not a word, you know what I mean. So that's another really key piece in here. And all of us, I appreciate the applause when people talked about affordable housing, and we've heard we have to make those investments and do it through philanthropy. That's on this list as well. So, you know, think about your philanthropic donations to housing-based charities with respect, not just to healthcare and universities, which is where the vast majority of philanthropic donations go. And yet we're reminded, let's get a roof over people's head, both in how we vote and how we give. Back to you, my friend.
Well, I want to pick up a theme that Eric described in terms of sort of the exodus of, I think you were focusing on a younger population, including a younger, really well-educated population, a population that has real potential to earn decent earnings. And the exodus, I think, signals that Eric is showcasing for us that the growing gap between home prices and local earnings, that blue line and the orange line I shared earlier, it's transforming class dynamics in this city, in this province, across the country. At Gen Squeeze, we've been doing some polling lately to try and understand how Canadians now think about affluence. And we said, you know, what do you think about someone who is a young lawyer and makes over $200,000? Typically, we'd say, that person sounds pretty affluent. They're in the top, few percentile of earners. And then we say they're a renter. And then people's judgment is like, I'm not sure. And then we say, imagine a widow living on her own with an income in her pension of just $25,000, very close to, what would earn her the guaranteed income supplement in Canada. They're like, oh, clearly she's low income. But she lives in the GTA and owns outright now a home that's worth $4 million. Oh, well then clearly she's part of the global 1%, people say. Which is it? Is that person affluent or not? And I think that is what is at issue here. Here's a stat, I don't know if I shared it in my earlier remarks. In Ontario today, by comparison with 1976, when baby boomers were coming of age as young adults, the value of principal residence is $1 trillion higher. I don't really even know as an academic, what is $1 trillion more? I'm not really good at quantifying. It's a lot. More than 2/3 of that extra wealth is owned by Ontarians over 55. So Janet talked about our standard of living, and I think this really does matter. But when we talk about an extra $1 trillion of affluence that is finding itself revolving around a part of our demographic, but not spread evenly, that we're seeing that the standard of living might be actually bifurcating. The middle class might be hollowing out because for an older demographic, more affluence is achievable. For a younger demographic, not so much, and newcomers of any age, not so much anymore. I'm not so sure who said it, but I worry that the story Aleem told about the immigrant story that once was a reality, may now indeed, maybe it was Eric who said it was a myth, as we're wanting to invite more people to come to our country, which is why I come and show up to our second lecture series, which will focus on just this issue. Nice plug. But let me end with the following. There is reason to be hopeful. Somebody on the panel said, God, it might have been Eric again, so maybe I should have just had Eric do the final comments, that if we do adapt Toronto, it will be better. We will make a better life for one another. It's not just a math equation, housing affordability in our personal budgets. Restoring affordability means people stay connected. Grandparents can easily visit their grandchildren who live within transit distance. You don't need to hop on a plane. Affordability means less stuck commuting long distances to where we work. Affordability means restoring the dream that hard work can bring into reach. A home that meets our needs. Affordability means, to Janet's point, that the people on whom we're going to rely for the services that we need can afford to live here too, and can access parks and green space and walkable spaces. That's a pretty nice vision for Toronto. That can be a vision in which young and old alike can thrive, as can newcomers of any age. That's the vision that I hope for. So as we started with feelings of grief and stress and anger and entanglement, the focus on a shared purpose to bring us to a question of what will the legacy that we leave, especially those of us like me and those older than me who have benefited, how can we leave it into celebrating the possibility that we leave a better Toronto than we inherited? Thank you very much.
Wow, well, that was quite the evening. I know that samosas are actually outside, so I will keep this really, really quick. I think if I was to summarize the evening, the one thing that I would say it's important for all of us, and I think, Rahim, you talked about this, is each of us have privilege in this room. And so I would say the first thing is for us to pay it forward. It's our responsibility to pay it forward. The second thing, I think, and we've been talking about it all evening, is not to admire the problem. And so that is another piece that I would really want to kind of bring home. Solving homelessness and saying yes to housing. Those are tidbits of information that I really hope that you guys can have a conversation amongst your samosas with elected officials that are here, with the leaders of the organizations that are here, with our partners and with yourselves. It's going to be important to stay and engage in conversation. You see that the call to action sheet is on your seat, and this is a tool that's actually meant to be on your fridge, so I'm really hoping, I'm holding you to this. We should have provided magnets, Ian and Paul. You have to come back for the magnets, right? And so have that with you as you're having and engaging in conversation outside. I want to certainly kind of reiterate that there are 2 other sessions that we're going to be having. They're planned for April the 19th, and like I said, we're going to try to have an iftar. It'll be really interesting to have an iftar breaking of the fast with this many people. Please do come back. And June the 7th, and that will be our capstone event, and if you do give us a good evaluation, we might come back for more, you never know. I do want to take an opportunity to thank the volunteers that made today possible. Some of you who do not know that the Ismaili Centre events are solely done on the heels of volunteers, from ushers to IT, to hospitality, to photography, to videography. I'm going to ask you to stand up. September 2022 marked the 50th year of anniversary of the Ismailis' migration and settlement across the world to Canada. And we have an exhibition that's out there, panels that I really would like you to have a look at as you are having conversations. The last thing, I'm going to ask Eric, Jan, Sacha, and Rahim to come here. I'm going to ask Ian, Paul, and Moise to come. We're going to just give a very small token of appreciation to our moderator and speakers. A special thanks to the Canada Rector Foundation, who really made this evening possible and who has made actually the entire series possible. I think the Canada Rector family has joined us. They weren't here when we acknowledged them at first, but really do want to acknowledge our sponsors. We couldn't have done this without their generosity, so a really good round of applause for the Canada Rector Foundation.